Well, thank you very much for coming today. I'm probably a surprise to most of you. And what I'm going to be talking to you about today will probably surprise you even more. Now, I use notes because at 85 years of age, I still have a little trouble remembering things. Steve can talk from forever and ever because he has it all up here. I have it all down here. Perhaps some of you don't know me here, but I have been, and my wife we've been coming here since we were in that shed over there. So the topic I'm going to talk to you about today is certainly nothing that I did in my career. Of course, I've been retired for many years. When I told my wife I was going to retire, she turned around, walked away from me, and said, "Well, it's a good thing." But under her breath, she says, "Now there's going to be something else around the house that doesn't work." So since I retired, I had to go back to work. Hello. I have the good fortune to have written and published 5 books since I retired. I'm now working on my 6th, probably will be the most important book that I've ever written. It's a guide for young men thinking about marriage. The title of the book is "Yes, Dear." That also explains why I've had the good fortune to be married for 50 years. Now, the thing I try to avoid is, does 50 years sound better or worse than a half century? Better, okay. Well, in spite of all that, retirement has been great. And a few years ago, I began to study the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights. Since that time, I've shared the information I'm going to give to you today with churches and groups both in Illinois and here in Arizona. You know, I'm convinced that our founding fathers were chosen by God to write those 3 important documents, and that they are the basis for the strength and success of our country. Most presidents and many other people in government have expressed those same feelings. One that you may not know is a fellow by the name of Tom Campbell. He was an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court, and a few years ago, he stated publicly, "The founding fathers believed devoutly that there was a God and that the rights of men were rooted not in the state, not in the legislature, not in any other human power, but in God alone." As I told you, I'm not coming to talk to you as a Democrat or a Republican or a Libertarian or a conservative. I kind of like to describe myself as a Bible-believing constitutionalist. Now, perhaps you don't know what that means. A constitutionalist is someone who believes that the people in government should not be allowed to do anything that they choose. A constitutionalist believes that there are rules made by the founding documents and the responsible higher power. Constitutionalists also believe in the Christian American way of life and capitalism, which has allowed millions of people in our country to rise from poverty to prosperity, unlike other countries. Over the past months, I've become increasingly concerned about where our country is going. Some would look at me and dismiss the fact that, well, he's just an old man. And I would agree with him that I am just an old man. But I do think that I'm not out of touch with the reality of what's happening in our country and what is occurring for the past few decades. Not just the past few weeks, not just the past few months, but as I said, for a few decades. I believe the Bible was an important part of the framework of America, that the founding fathers did not intend for the Bible to be discarded after they used it to develop the Constitution. And I think for decades the leaders in our country felt the same way. But I'm not sure that I have the same confidence in some of our leaders today. I want to take you back to 1892. That's 116 years after the Declaration of Independence was written. I'm going to ask you to help me with this. The Pledge of Allegiance to the United States flag was first created for the celebration of the 400th year anniversary of Columbus discovering America. Remember what you used to recite in school? Are we ready? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I think you all went to a country school like I did. The words under God, though, were not inserted until 1954. President Dwight Eisenhower approved these words in order to differentiate us from any other country who has a pledge of allegiance to their society. You know, it used to be that pledge was heard in every schoolroom. The pledge has been under attack for quite some time. Recently, in the area where I live in the Midwest, there is a college there has prohibited anyone from using the Pledge of Allegiance in any of their activities. That's college. However, in 1955, President Eisenhower said, this is a president and how he said it, without God there can be no American form of government, nor any American way of life. Recognition of the Supreme Being is the first and most basic expression of Americanism. Thus, the Founding Fathers of America saw it, and thus, with God's help, we will continue to have it. That was President Eisenhower in 1955. Does that sound like something you would hear in Congress today? Over 50 years ago, school-sponsored prayer was banned. I'm sure many of you here have heard the name Madalyn Murray O'Hair. How many have heard that name? All of you. Well, I'm sure that you've heard Steve talk about it. That's the name that people will forever associate with the banning of school prayer. She brought a suit against the Baltimore School District, which led to a landmark Supreme Court ruling ending the official reading of the Bible in public schools. That was 1963. She was an atheist, the founder of the American Atheist Party. An American Atheist magazine was something that she developed. She described religion as a crutch, an irrational irrelevance relying on superstitions and supernatural power. Miss O'Hara had two sons. One followed in her footsteps. The other, William J. Murray, became a Christian in 1980 and is a Baptist minister. See, I think that shows God has a sense of humor, really. When Miss O'Hara learned that William became a Christian, her comment was, one could call this a postnatal abortion on the part of me as his mother. I repudiate him entirely and completely for now and all time. He is beyond human forgiveness. I'm sure glad she wasn't my mother. Miss O'Hara filed several lawsuits. This is what her life was all about, filing these suits against Christianity and against the American way of life and for socialism in her life. She wanted atheists to have equal time on religion on the radio. She challenged weekly religious services at the White House. She challenged the open reading of the Bible by astronauts. She challenged the opening prayers at city council meetings. She challenged the inclusion of the phrase, "In God we trust," on our currency. She wanted to remove the provision requiring a belief in God for persons holding office of public trust in Texas, where she lived. She challenged the use of the national park facilities for the Pope to hold a Roman Catholic Mass on the Mall in Washington, D.C. She tried to remove the nativity scene from the rotunda in the Capitol building in Austin. She challenged the full-time employment of an unordained chaplain at a tax-funded county hospital in Texas. By the way, she and her other son and her granddaughter were abducted and murdered by an ex-convict who had been one of her trusted atheist employees. But I don't believe that what she started ended with her death. Think about all the things that are going on now that involve the areas of her lawsuit. Every year we move closer and closer to what she was trying to accomplish. Every year we have more and more challenges. The display of the nativity scene, the use of the words Merry Christmas, or the removal of the 10 Commandments from buildings in the United States, for city council meetings not opening with a prayer, to school districts dictating that there can be no prayer on the ball fields before a sporting event, to a coach being fired because he knelt down after a ball game and prayed silently, to the burning of our flag. To me, that sounds like the elimination of anything pertaining to biblical principles, the very principles that our country was founded on. Every lawsuit was a seed of destruction. Here's my unfortunate, irritating favorite. Abortion is probably the most divisive issue in our society today. Abortion was decriminalized nationwide in 1973. It was legal in some states at that time, but in 1973 there was a uniform framework established. I'm sure you know what it was called, Roe versus Wade. Since that time, over 50 million unborn lives have been taken, and there's no stopping it yet. How far have we come since then? Are you ready for this? Late-term abortions are now being allowed up to 24 weeks. That's 6 months. That is a living human being, in my case, I believe. If you're a person who believes that what the Bible teaches, then how can you vote for a congressman or congresswoman that supports that type of legislation? These are only a few examples of how far we've drifted away from the fundamentals of what our country was founded on, biblical principles. Calvin Coolidge, the 30th president, said, "The strength of our country is the strength of our religious convictions. The foundations of our society and our government rest so much on the teachings of the Bible that it would be difficult to support them if faith in those teachings would practically cease to exist." If you look back and read what past presidents have said, they all said about the same thing. We're a country based on principles and morals gleaned from the Bible. Is our country moving away from that? Are we at a crossroads that if we're not careful, we'll take the wrong turn? I read an article recently that I think you'll be interested in. It states that Christianity seems to be declining in modern Western societies, but conservative churches are flourishing in non-Western societies. Half the world is getting more religious, half the world is getting less religious. We're in the lesser half. The underground church in China is growing. It is estimated that there are approximately 68 million Christians in China. That's only about 5% of the population. This may seem like a small number, but the fact that it's growing is the most important part. I'm sure you know that in China, which is a communist country, the faith-based organizations are perceived to be one of the most serious threats to China's lost it there. There are some cracks being developed in China. They have now a market economy. Does anyone know where the most Bibles are printed in the world? Huh? China. Well, whatever. China produces 18 million Bibles per year through a company called Amity. Half are directed to Chinese Christians because it's growing, and the other half are sent abroad. You know, we've got a long way to go in China, and they're trying to be a Christian nation. But every tiny step helps. I sincerely believe that God's hand is at work in China. The Pew Research Center published a report recently that the number of non-religious Americans is growing every year. The number of people identifying as Christians is declining in the United States. It's dropped 12% in the past 12 years. There are more atheists and agnostics in America than there were 10 years ago. And 17% of all the people in the United States that were surveyed have no Christian background or religious background at all. I find these statistics very disheartening and wonder what impact this is going to have on our country. I see some of the results already. Everybody knows who Harry S. Stop the Buck Truman is, don't you? Harry S. Truman, 33rd president. He was not afraid to say what he thought. He is quoted as saying, "The fundamental basis of the nation's laws was given to Moses on the Mount. The fundamental basis of our Bill of Rights comes from the teachings we got from Exodus, St. Matthew, from Isaiah, and St. Paul." He said, if we don't have a proper fundamental moral background, we will finally end up with a totalitarian government which does not believe in the rights of anyone except the state. Are we sliding in that direction? The people in Russia and China and many other countries are not content with what socialism and communism has brought to them. And it has delivered to them hate, misery, and discontent. The growing of Christianity in those countries indicates that those people are seeking a better way of life, as we have in America, which has been structured around Christianity and communism. Unfortunately, now in America, we have such an abundance that we do not appreciate it. This abundance has come from the grace of God and through our capitalistic society, but we're drifting away from that. You have a piece of paper, and it shows the program and how we are moving into abundance, and from there back downhill. If you don't have one, we can get you one. So you have to pick out on that piece of paper where you think we are right now as a country. We've gone up to abundance, and now are we going back the other way? Edmund Burke was an 18th century Anglo-Irish statesman and philosopher. Burke was a proponent of the importance of religious institutions for the moral stability and good of the people. He is quoted as saying, "Those who don't know history are doomed to repeat it." He said, "Liberty does not exist in the absence of morality." I'm going to give you another name, and I'm sure you've heard it. How many of you have heard the name Saul Olinsky? All right, well, let's talk about him. When he first wrote his book, Rules for Radicals, he dedicated that book to Lucifer. As they discovered that people were complaining about that, they changed it, so he now dedicates it to Irene and calls Lucifer just one of the people that helped him. He's attributed to writing the 8 steps to topple a nation, but in my research I could not find any total evidence that he did write those 8 steps, but they were published in the newspaper under his name. So whoever did write these 8 steps created a playbook for what's going on in our country today. Here are the 8 steps to topple this nation and create a socialist state. As I review these 8 steps, pay close attention to number 7. Number 1, health care. Control health care and you control the people. Number 2, poverty. Increase poverty levels as high as possible. Poor people are easier to control and will not fight back if you're providing them with their needs. Debt, in number 3. Increase the national debt to an unsustainable level. That way you are able to increase taxes. This will produce more poverty. Number 4, gun control. Remove the ability to defend themselves from the government. That way you are able to create a police state. Number 5, welfare. Take control of every aspect of their lives. Food, housing, education. Take control of what people read and listen to. Take control of what children are being taught in school. And number 7, I said pay close attention. Religion, it says, remove the belief in God from the government and from the schools. And number 8, class warfare. Divide the people into 2 groups, the wealthy and the poor. This will cause more discontent, and it will be easier to tax the wealthy to support the poor. Does this sound familiar? Have many of these steps been taken already? I think one of the 8 points we have to be serious about of these 8 points is how they are eroding America. And the voice is getting louder and louder. But do these people really think that America should be changed to a socialist country? Do they really understand what that means? Remember this, the government cannot give anything to anybody that the government does not take from somebody else. Karl Marx, you know that name? How many of you know who Karl Marx was? Everybody. He died 136 years ago. He was the founder of the Communist Party. He believed that capitalism would be replaced by socialism, which in turn would lead to communism. He said the basis for socialism would be atheism and secularism, believing that no life should have a spiritual basis. He also believed that the first requisite for happiness of the people is the abolishment of religion. He said religion is a sort of spiritual booze. When I hear people say they want to see socialism become part of the fabric of America, I think of these words from Karl Marx. Do you really want a country run by a government that has no spiritual compass? I don't. Marx is also quoting as saying that the socialist is a person too stupid to realize that he's really a communist. That's scary. Now we come to a fellow by the name of Joseph Stalin. Everybody know who that was? Joseph Stalin had a 5-year plan to eliminate religion in the USSR. He believed that the concept of God would disappear from the Soviet Union in 5 years, in a 5-year period from 1932 to 1937, through his anti-religious campaign. However, this anti-religious plan did not work in spite of all his efforts. During this period of anti-religious persecution, it became commonplace and it severely prohibited religious activities in order to further his expansion of atheism. The main target of the anti-religious campaign was the Russian Orthodox Church. Nearly all of the clergy and many of the believers were shot or sent to labor camps. All theology schools were closed. Church publications were prohibited. And are you ready for this? More than 85,000 Orthodox priests were shot in 1937 alone. Well, with the onslaught of World War II, he needed the United States and the UK as allies who were Christian nations. So he temporarily backed off of his plan. The theory of communism can be summed up in a single sentence: abolishment of private property and religion. Since the 1800s, there has been a struggle between capitalism, socialism, and communism. However, since the collapse of the Soviet Union, I think that was in 1991, there has been an upsurge in affiliation with the Orthodox Christians in Russia. Between 1991 and 2008, the share of Russian adults believing that they are Orthodox Christians rose from 31% to 72%. That is over a 50% increase in people believing in God. While those not affiliated with any church of any kind, it fell from 61% to 18%. I believe that God's hand is at work in both Russia and China. Another example of a place we hear about a lot, it's called North Korea. Another is Cuba, and another is Venezuela. In North Korea, the Bible is banned because the people are supposed to believe that their leaders are gods. In 1958, North Korea declared its ideology to be socialism, and it took away all the people's private property and dismantled family groups. There are no property rights because the state owns everything. in North Korea. There is no freedom of speech. I cringe when I hear people say and talk about socialism is the way of the future. I honestly think they have no concept of what socialism really is. They think that everyone will be equal and everything will be free. Well, they're right. Everyone except the ruling class, about 15%, they will be equal. But the masses on the bottom rung will be equal too in poverty. Are you aware of this one? I think I want to get you on. Did you know that that the first form of government in New England in 1600 was actually a communist form of government? In 1600, this one caught me off guard. The Pilgrims stipulated that the provisions and stock and all goods of the colony would be divided equally. This meant that even if you didn't work as hard as your neighbor, you received the same provisions. Women viewed the communal chores that they were required to perform for others other than their own family as a form of slavery. The younger, able-bodied men soon tired of doing all the work. The first years resulted in shortages and starvation. More than 50% of the population died from starvation. Eventually, no one did more than the minimum because the incentive to excel was destroyed. Those who did not work received just the same amount as those who did all the work. The industrious were neutralized. Socialism made strong men lazy. On the brink of extermination, the colony's leader changed direction. He allocated a portion of land to each of the settlers, and guess what happened? It was a success. The famine that nearly wiped them out in 1623 gave way to a period of agricultural abundance. The man's name was Bradford. You can look it up. He was a profoundly religious man and saw the hand of God in the Pilgrims' economic recovery. You know, the incentive of the Pilgrims in that colony were given, and when they owned a piece of land and began to be able to produce their own crops, you know, that matters every bit today as much as it did then. Why do people in this great country not understand that socialism is destroying our country? How moving away from the moral tenets of the Bible can destroy this great land? I think a great part of that answer is that they're not educated. It's become an emotional issue rather than based on head knowledge. They have been told that they are victims of society that is made up of rich people who don't deserve to be rich because they became rich on the backs of the working people and pushed someone else out to take their place. That is Marxism as he stated it. There's just not one pie in America. There are many pies. Everyone has the opportunity to receive their part. I want to stop for just a minute and tell you something that I probably don't always tell. I did not graduate from high school. I left home on a Greyhound bus with $60 in my pocket and have become financially well off because of capitalism, not because of socialism. Without a high school education in a socialist country, I don't know what I'd be doing, but I wouldn't be standing up here talking to you about my belief in God. If you think you're one of those victims and think that the rich people are your oppressors, what are you going to think when government becomes the controller? You cannot multiply wealth by dividing it. Thomas Jefferson said, "A government big enough to give you everything you want is strong enough to take everything you have." Think about that. I know many people will think I'm a crazy old man to even be concerned about what goes on here. But when I listen to the news about what's happening, I get very concerned. What Madalyn Murray O'Hair started has blossomed over the years. Anything to do with religion or the Bible is being attacked more strongly every year. The seeds of socialism have been planted in a society and are blossoming before our very eyes. It makes me think of a garden that has one weed, and that one weed is left unattended. That one weed can spread and take over the entire garden. It makes me think of an infection that could start in the tip of your finger, and if not eradicated, can grow to encompass every major organ in the body. Is that happening in America? I wish I had time to read the entire letter that was written by a young lady who was in grad school working on her MBA. She was scrolling down the news on her phone and saw an article about how our presidential candidates who are calling for policies to fix the so-called prejudices of capitalism. She went on to say that if you look around you, you will see that we live in the most privileged time in the most prosperous nation, and we've become completely blind to it. She stated that her generation, the younger generation, is being indoctrinated by mainstream narrative to actually believe that they have never seen prosperity. And yet we all have to look around. That's all we have to do. And you can see the prosperity. When you go to Walmart, there's not one person. You have to worry about if you can get to the places where you want to get without running into somebody. New car dealerships are doing well. Our society, and I'm not political, but our society is as good as it has ever been, if not better. She believes the answer to is that her generation has only seen prosperity, so they have nothing to compare it to. She went on to state that we have an entitlement problem, ungratefulness problem, and it's spreading like the plague. So I may not be just a cranky old man that doesn't know what I'm talking about. At least there's one person out there, a young person, who is also concerned about our country. Dick Cheney, vice president, said, "It's easy to take liberty for granted when you have never had it taken away from you." I want you to be very careful and listen to what I'm going to say to you right now. When I got to this, it stunned me, but the facts are the facts. If you woke up this morning with more health than illness, you're more blessed than the 1 million people who will not survive the week. If you've never experienced the danger of battle, the loneliness of imprisonment, the agony of torture, or the pangs of starvation, you're ahead of about 500 million people in the world. If you can attend church meetings, attend church without fear of harassment, arrest, torture, or death, you are more blessed than almost 3 billion people in the world. If you have food in your refrigerator, clothes on your back, a roof over your head, and a place to sleep, you are richer than 75% of the world's population. If you have money in the bank, some money in your wallet, a little spare change and a dish somewhere, you are among the top 8% of the world's wealthy people. And yet we complain. President Ronald Reagan, by proclamation at the annual day of prayer in 1983, declared that the year of the Bible. The proclamation stated that the Bible had made a unique contribution to the shaping of the United States and its distinctive and blessed nation and people. He said, "Inside the Bible's pages are all the answers to all the problems man has ever known. It is my firm belief that the enduring values presented in its pages have a great meaning for all of us and for our nation. The Bible can touch our hearts, order our minds, and refresh our souls." That was President Reagan. In the book of Psalms, in the Bible, there is a part that says that the promised land that was once so full of promise is now full of darkness and violence. The Israelites wondered if God had abandoned them. I've heard people wonder that same thing aloud about our nation. They're wondering if God's going to say, "I'm through with those people." But if you continue reading the book of Psalms, it says, God is willing to forgive and restore a nation in response to the prayers of the people. I believe that we are on the cusp of having our God-loving way of life destroyed. So this is my call to you today. Remember the promise of God's grace, His wisely allocated power, and pray for our country. Remember these two statements. The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. Nobody made a greater mistake than he who did nothing because he could only do a little. And remember, you have an active role in what happens in our country. We as Christians should do whatever is necessary to teach our young people the Christian way of life. It's not easy. I have a daughter that I'm still working on. I've been working on teaching her a Christian way of life for several years. Well, she's moving a little bit, but I'm not going to give up. You may be called meek and foolish to pray for our country, but there are examples throughout the Bible where God uses meek people to do His work. God's work is done through His people, and we are His people. And never forget, there is no darkness that God cannot overcome. Thank you, and God bless our great country, the United States of America. Thank you very much. Oh, sure.
Anybody have any questions for Don?
Yeah. I'll answer some of them if I can. Yes.
I've been under the understanding that Trump is initiating freedom of religion, prayer back in our schools. He does have a movement that, but people have to support that.
You're absolutely right. I believe he's been doing a pretty good job of that. But the enemies are on the horizon. On this next election is probably going to be one of the most important elections for capitalism and the church and a free society that's been in my lifetime that has occurred. So go out there and vote. That's very, very important. Yes, way back. Oh.
It's Selena. You don't need a mic.
Hey, I almost had to wait. So what is the difference, like the raw difference between socialism and communism? So I'm trying to explain to my daughters,
Okay.
and is it
Very simple. Socialism acquires power through the vote. Communism acquires power through the gun. That's simple.
so once you get to the socialist state, then it's
Well, as Karl Marx said, anyone who believes that socialism is different from communism is an idiot. Once the power is taken out, let's go to Venezuela, which was 10 or 15 years ago was one of the wealthiest countries in the southern hemisphere. So they got a guy in, a heavyset guy, I've forgotten his name. And once he got in, he started tightening the noose. And then the new guy came in, and now people are eating their animals for subsistence. They went from capitalism to socialism to communism. Now, you got to understand that once they get power, the only thing that prevents the guys at the top from taking more and more control is that they die like Stalin did, or if a war breaks out, which I hope that never happens. So communism is creeping toward us through socialism. Socialism is going to creep more and more toward us if some of these people are talking about free health care, free education, free this, free that, free something else. Remember what I said here? You can't give something to one person without taking it from somebody else. See, the government owns nothing except the ability to tax us for those projects that they wish to have us pay for. And I would suggest to you that every project that every one of the individuals in Congress, and the first thing they look at is, how is this going to affect me? Now, if you got this one, you are a true person of history. Who was the man who said that once an individual becomes part of Congress by stating that he is going to help the people, ends up at that time changing his attitude toward he's going to do whatever's necessary to stay in government? Parliamentary form of government, it was called back then. Does anybody who knew said that? First name was Adolf. You can take it from there. That's what he said. It's in a book. I read his book, and it scared me because there are people today in our country, I believe, that are following not only what Hitler put in his book, but what Karl Marx and the others put in their books. I know we're sitting here very comfortable. I decided that this is a way that I can help move the pendulum back toward where it belongs. I need your help. And you're going to be embarrassed. I talk to people sometimes and they just embarrass me. So what? I'll tell you one story, and then unless you have any other questions. Yes, John?
Yeah, I do. This is for people that can't hear too well in the audience. So what's the difference between socialism and communism?
Well, I just simply said, I'm sorry, socialism acquires control by the vote. Communism acquires control by the gun. Capitalism is that I can own my own property and I can win or lose. I can make a lot of money or I cannot make a lot of money. The Bible says there's always going to be poor people. That's just the way it is. It's in the Bible. However, in the United States of America, you can come from being a poor person to being middle class, to being wealthy, and you don't have to steal it from somebody else to acquire that. So that's why I believe that capitalism is with us. I had something happen the other day. On the back of the little piece of paper that I gave you is information on where I've gotten some of my research. And there was a man at the other church that I was speaking at. He said, I have a grandson who does not believe in God. I have a grandson that he believes that socialism is going to be the answer to his life. He said, do you have any information on how you got the information on socialism that you talk about? I forgot about it. I forgot what he said. Then one day, a week or so ago, I thought maybe I ought to put that together. If you will look at this, there's some of the good, I said the good, bad, and the ugly. So I read all I could to put this together from everybody that I could, whether they were socialists, communists, capitalists, or otherwise, Christians, non-Christians. And I discovered that this is what he was looking for, something that he could take to his grandson and say, read this, study this. And this is just the beginning of my research, which continues on a daily basis because the world changes on a daily basis. I want us in this little bitty church, compared to some of the big ones I've spoke to, I want us to be the leaders in changing the world back to what it was, a constitutional democracy where the people in our country are not thinking about free stuff. You know, if you have no more questions, God bless you. God bless the United States of America. Huh? 250. Well, actually, we've been around now about 234 years from the Constitution was being. I don't know. 100 years from now, it'll be interesting. I won't be here. You won't be here. But what we do today, as what the pioneers did, what those individuals who wrote the Constitution, what they did, will be here 100 years from now. God bless.